Wyoming Territory, 1879. A late autumn storm had turned the sky the color of a day-old bruise, and even the hardiest of men had tucked themselves behind closed doors as the wind howled across the plains like a wounded beast. All men, that is, except for Ryder Quinn. At 25, Ryder had seen more harsh Wyoming winters than most men twice his age. The cattle were secured, his small cabin weatherproofed as best he could manage, and provisions stocked. Still, something had drawn him out tonight, some restlessness in his bones that wouldn't let him sit before the fire with a book like sensible folk. Instead, he rode along the western boundary of the Lazy Q, the modest spread he'd built from nothing over the past 3 years. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rolling grasslands that in daylight shone golden but now looked as black as funeral crepe. Thunder followed almost immediately, and midnight, his coal-black gelding, snorted nervously beneath him. "Easy," Ryder murmured, patting the horse's neck. "Just checking the fence line and we'll head back." But the lie tasted hollow even to him. Truth was, nights like this, with the wind screaming and rain threatening, were when the memories came hardest. Memories of gunfire and men dying, of the war that had stolen his youth, and left him with nightmares that still jolted him awake most nights, sweat-soaked and trembling. The rain began to fall then, fat drops that quickly became a deluge. Ryder pulled his hat lower and his collar higher, though both gestures were futile against the onslaught. He was about to turn back when midnight suddenly froze, ears pricked forward toward something Ryder couldn't yet see. "What is it, boy?" Lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, Ryder caught sight of it, an overturned wagon half hidden in a ravine about 50 yards ahead. His heart quickened. Nobody in their right mind would be traveling in this weather, which meant whoever was down there had likely been caught when the storm blew in. He spurred midnight forward, reaching the edge of the ravine just as another bolt of lightning revealed the full scene below. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel spinning lazily in the wind. A horse lay dead in the traces, and beside the broken wagon, Ryder's breath caught. A figure huddled against the exposed underside of the wagon, seeking what little shelter it provided. Too small to be a man. "Hello there," Ryder called over the storm's fury. "You hurt?" No response came. Midnight picked his way carefully down the slope, hooves sliding in the mud. As they drew closer, Ryder could make out more details. A woman, no, a girl, perhaps her dress sodden and clinging to her frame, her head bowed against the rain. "Miss," he dismounted, approaching slowly. "Miss, can you hear me?" She lifted her head then, and Ryder found himself looking into a pair of eyes the color of summer cornflowers, wide with fear and exhaustion. Her face was streaked with mud and what might have been blood from a gash along her temple. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. "Stay back," she warned, her voice surprisingly steady despite her circumstances. She raised a small derringer, her hand shaking from cold or fear or both. "I mean it." Ryder raised his hands, palms out. "No harm intended, miss. Ryder Quinn's my name. I've got a ranch about 3 miles east of here. Saw your wagon and thought you might need help." He nodded toward the gun. "Though seems you've got things well in hand." A crack of thunder made her jump, and Ryder noticed how she winced, one arm wrapped protectively around her ribs. "You're hurt," he stated rather than asked. "And that storm's only getting worse. My place is dry, warm, and I've got supplies to tend those injuries. You're welcome to shoot me after we get you patched up if that's your preference." The ghost of a smile touched her blue-tinged lips before vanishing. "How do I know you're not worse than the storm?" "You don't," Ryder admitted, "but I reckon your options are limited at the moment." The girl looked at her dead horse, the shattered wagon, and then back at Ryder. Slowly she lowered the derringer. "Sophia," she said finally. "Sophia Ellis, 20 years old and too stubborn to die in a ditch during a Wyoming thunderstorm." Despite everything, Ryder felt a smile tug at his lips. "Well, Miss Ellis, let's make sure that stubbornness serves you well tonight." Moving carefully, he approached and knelt beside her. Up close, he could see she was shivering violently, her honey-blonde hair plastered to her pale face. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, was torn and mudded beyond recognition. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so," she replied, then proved herself wrong by immediately gasping in pain when she tried to rise. Without hesitation, Ryder swept her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. She stiffened initially, then relaxed slightly when another stab of pain clearly made resistance impossible. "My things," she protested weakly, gesturing toward the wagon. "We'll come back for what can be salvaged," Ryder promised. "But right now, you're turning blue, and those clouds are fixing to drop more water than No ever saw." Getting her onto midnight proved challenging with her injuries, but they managed with Ryder mounting first, then pulling her up before him. She sat sideways across his lap, her face pressed against his chest as much from necessity as from seeking warmth. "I'll keep you safe," he promised, adjusting his duster to shield her from the worst of the rain. "Just hold on." As they made their slow journey back to the lazy queue, Ryder could feel her trembling against him. The storm unleashed its full fury, turning the prairie into a treacherous quagmire that forced them to move at a walking pace. Every few minutes, Ryder checked to ensure Sophia remained conscious, speaking to her about nothing in particular: the names of the hills they passed, the herd of cattle he'd recently acquired, the apple tree behind his cabin that had finally produced fruit this year. "Why were you out here?" she asked at one point, her voice barely audible above the storm. Ryder hesitated. How to explain that sometimes the walls of his cabin seemed to close in around him, that on stormy nights the thunder sounded too much like artillery fire, that being alone with his thoughts became unbearable. "Checking fence lines," he said instead. In this, skepticism colored her weak voice. "Seems fortunate I did," he countered. She had no response to that, and they rode the rest of the way in silence, her body growing heavier against his as exhaustion claimed her. The cabin appeared like a mirage through the sheets of rain, lamplight glowing warmly from its single window. Ryder had left a lamp burning, a habit from his first years on the homestead when returning to a dark cabin had felt too much like entering a tomb. He carried Sophia inside, setting her gently on his narrow bed before stoking the fire in the small iron stove. The cabin was simple but solid: one room with a plank floor, the bed in one corner, a table and two chairs in another, and a small kitchen area with shelves of provisions. Books lined one wall, his most treasured possessions. "Miss Ellis," he said, turning back to find her eyes fluttering closed. "Sophia, you need to get out of those wet clothes." Her eyes snapped open, alarm replacing fatigue. "I've got a spare shirt and trousers," he added hastily. "They'll be too large, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you change." "No," she said, her voice stronger than before. "You're soaked through yourself, just turn around." Ryder nodded, retrieving the clothes from his trunk before turning to face the wall. He heard the rustle of fabric, punctuated by soft gasps of pain that made him wince in sympathy. "These injuries," he said to the rough-hewn logs of his cabin wall, "how did they happen?" A pause, then. "The wagon hit something, a hole, a rock, I don't know. It was already raining and the road was washed out in places. We flipped. Luther, my horse, broke his neck in the fall. I was thrown clear, but not before the wagon." She trailed off. "Crushed your ribs," Ryder guessed. "I think they're just bruised," she said. "I'm decent now." He turned to find her swimming in his flannel shirt. The trousers rolled multiple times at the ankles and cinched tight at the waist. Despite her predicament, something about the sight made his chest tighten strangely. "Let me look at that cut," he said, gesturing to her temple. She submitted to his examination, sitting on the edge of the bed while he cleaned the wound with water warmed on the stove and a dash of whiskey. It wasn't deep, but head wounds bled freely, and her hair was matted with blood on that side. "What brought you out this way alone?" Ryder asked as he worked. Not exactly hospitable country for a solo female traveler. Sophia's eyes met his, defiant despite her condition. "Who said I was alone?" Ryder's hands stilled. "Was there someone else with you at the wagon?" "No," she admitted after a pause. "I was alone, but I'm headed to Sweetwater. My aunt lives there." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but Ryder didn't press. Everyone in the Wyoming territory had something they were running toward or away from, often both. "Well, you're welcome here until you're healed enough to travel," he said, applying a clean bandage to her temple. "Though that might be a while, given the state of you and the weather." Sophia looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings and the single bed. "Where will you sleep?" "Floor suits me fine," Ryder said with a shrug. "Slept on worse during the war." He moved to the stove, stirring a pot of stew he'd left simmering earlier. "You should eat something, then rest. Those ribs need binding, but that can wait until you've warmed up proper." As he ladled stew into a bowl for her, Ryder was acutely aware of how strange it felt to have another person in his space. He'd been alone for so long that the simple presence of another breathing soul under his roof felt foreign, almost intrusive. Yet something about Sophia Ellis's direct gaze and quiet dignity made him feel as though she belonged here more than he did. "Thank you," she said softly as he handed her the bowl, "for finding me. I don't know how long I would have lasted out there." Ryder nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Eat," he said gruffly. "Food always looks better in the morning." Later, after he'd bound her ribs with strips torn from an old sheet, and made himself a pallet on the floor with spare blankets. Ryder lay awake listening to the storm rage outside, and Sophia's even breathing from the bed. The frontier was no place for attachment, he reminded himself. People came and went, died or moved on. He'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Tomorrow he would see about salvaging her belongings from the wagon. Then when she was well enough, he would take her to Sweetwater to her aunt, and that would be the end of it. Just a chance encounter during a storm, nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed him, Ryder Quinn couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world, like the first tremors before an avalanche. Morning brought watery sunlight in the aftermath of the storm's fury. Ryder rose before dawn, moving quietly so as not to wake Sophia, who slept deeply, one hand curled beneath her cheek. In sleep, with the worry smoothed from her brow, she looked even younger, and Ryder felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. He built up the fire, put coffee on to boil, and stepped outside to assess the damage. The storm had blown down a section of fence on the north side and scattered debris across the yard, but overall, the lazy Q had weathered the tempest intact. The same couldn't be said for the land itself. New gullies had been carved into the earth by rushing water, and the creek that marked his eastern boundary had swollen to twice its normal size. By the time he returned to the cabin, Sophia was awake, sitting up in bed with a grimace of pain. "Morning," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "How are those ribs?" "They've felt better," she admitted. "But I'll manage." Ryder poured 2 cups of coffee, adding a generous spoonful of sugar to hers before handing it over. When she raised an eyebrow, he shrugged. "Sweet things help with pain," he explained. "Learned that during the war." "You were a soldier?" she asked, accepting the cup with a small nod of thanks. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Joined in '63, right after I turned 18. Spent most of my time in Tennessee and Georgia." "My father was in the 14th Pennsylvania," Sophia said quietly. "He never came home." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken grief. Ryder had known too many men who never returned, had helped bury some of them himself. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Sophia nodded, her eyes distant. "It was a long time ago." They drank their coffee in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional whistle of wind through the cabin's eaves. Ryder found himself studying her surreptitiously over the rim of his cup. In the morning light, he could see that her honey-blonde hair had dried into soft waves that framed a heart-shaped face. Her eyes were indeed as blue as cornflowers, set above high cheekbones and a determined chin. Despite her injuries and obvious fatigue, there was a resilience to her that impressed him. "I should go back for your things today," he said finally, "if you're up to telling me what needs retrieving." "There's not much," Sophia replied. "A trunk with some clothes and books, my mother's silver hand mirror, and a small box of letters." A flush crept up her neck. "And if you could, there's a photograph in a frame, my parents on their wedding day." "It's all I have of them." "I'll find it," Ryder promised. He hesitated, then asked, "Your aunt in Sweetwater, she's expecting you." Something flickered across Sophia's face, too quick to interpret. "Yes, of course, Aunt Margaret. She's my mother's sister." Ryder nodded, though something about her response niggled at him. "I'll head out after breakfast, should be back by midday, weather permitting." The journey to the overturned wagon took longer than expected. The storm had transformed familiar paths into muddy quagmires, and twice Ryder had to detour around washed-out sections of trail. When he finally reached the ravine, he found the scene much as they'd left it, though scavengers had already begun working on the dead horse. The wagon itself had settled deeper into the mud, making accessing its contents challenging. Ryder worked methodically, recovering a trunk that presumably held Sophia's clothes, a small wooden box that rattled with what might be letters, and several books sodden beyond salvation. The silver mirror was wedged beneath a broken crate, its handle bent but the glass intact. The photograph proved more elusive. Ryder searched every corner of the wagon, increasingly concerned that it had been lost in the accident. Finally, he found it half buried in mud near where he'd first discovered Sophia. The frame was cracked and the image water-damaged, but the photograph itself was still discernible, a solemn-looking man in Union blue standing beside a seated woman with Sophia's same honey-blonde hair. As he secured the items to Midnight's saddle, something else caught Ryder's eye, a folded newspaper protruding from a puddle. Curious, he retrieved it, shaking off excess water. The Central City Register, dated just 2 weeks prior. One headline had been circled in ink: "Local banker found dead, foul play suspected." Ryder frowned, scanning the article. Harrison J. Thornton, respected banker of Central City, Colorado, had been found dead in his office, a gunshot wound to the chest. Authorities were investigating the circumstances, particularly given that a substantial sum was missing from the bank's vault. The article mentioned that Thornton had no family except a ward, a young woman whose name was. His eyes widened as he read the name, Sophia Ellis. Tucking the newspaper inside his coat, Ryder remounted and began the journey back to the cabin, his thoughts troubled. Why had Sophia left Central City right after her guardian's murder? Why lie about heading to an aunt in Sweetwater, and most importantly, was she running from something or someone? By the time the Lazy Q came into view, Ryder had decided not to confront Sophia immediately. Whatever her reasons for deception, she was injured and alone. He would keep her safe first and ask questions later. He found her sitting at the table, one of his books open before her. She'd managed to brush her hair and wash her face, and despite the oversized clothes and bandaged temple, she looked remarkably composed. "You found everything?" she asked anxiously as he entered, her eyes going to the items he carried. "Most of it," Ryder said, setting down the trunk and other recovered possessions. He handed her the photograph, watching her face carefully. The frame's damaged, but the picture survived. Sophia's fingers trembled slightly as she took it, eyes softening as she gazed at the image. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." The genuine emotion in her voice made Ryder hesitate. Whatever else she might be hiding, her attachment to her parents was clearly real. "The wagon's a lost cause," he said, hanging up his coat, the newspaper concealed inside. "And I'm afraid some of your books didn't survive the rain." "Books can be replaced," she said, carefully setting the photograph on the table. "I'm just grateful you found these things." Ryder busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork, aware of Sophia watching him with curious eyes. "You cook," she observed. "Most men I've known would sooner starve." He shrugged. "Not much choice out here alone. You learn or you go hungry." "How long have you been alone?" she asked. Ryder paused, wooden spoon halfway to the pot. "On this land, 3 years. Before that, I drifted around after the war, did ranch work mostly." "No family." "None living," he said shortly, returning his attention to the food. Sophia seemed to sense his reluctance to elaborate. "Well, you've built something impressive here. Even I can see that, and I know nothing about ranching." "What do you know about?" Ryder asked, genuinely curious despite his misgivings. A small smile touched her lips. "Books, numbers. I helped my guardian with his accounts. He said I had a head for figures." Guardian, not aunt, the first truth she'd offered about herself, perhaps without realizing it. "Useful skill," Ryder commented neutrally. "More useful than most of what I learned, anyway." "The war taught you how to survive," Sophia said quietly. "That's no small thing." Their eyes met across the small cabin, and Ryder felt an unexpected connection, as though she'd seen something in him that most missed. It was unsettling and strangely comforting at once. The moment broke when Sophia winced, pressing a hand to her side. "Those ribs need rest," Ryder said. "Eat something, then you should lie down again." "I've been in bed all day," she protested. "I'm not an invalid." "No, you're a woman with bruised ribs and a head wound," Ryder corrected, "who was half frozen in a storm less than a day ago. Rest isn't optional." Her chin lifted stubbornly. "At least let me help with something. I can't just sit here while you do everything." Ryder considered her determined expression and relented slightly. "You can help me catalog the spring supplies I need to order. If you're good with numbers, you can calculate what I can afford." The compromise satisfied her, and after they'd eaten, Ryder brought out his account book and supply lists. As they worked side by side at the small table, he found himself impressed by Sophia's quick mind and practical suggestions. "You're ordering too much coffee and not enough flour," she said at one point, running her finger down his calculations. "And you've forgotten to account for the freight charges from Cheyenne." "Coffee's more important than bread," Ryder argued half-heartedly. "Not if you plan to eat through winter," she countered, making a correction in his ledger with neat handwriting. As darkness fell, Ryder noticed her eyelids growing heavy despite her attempts to hide her fatigue. "Enough," he said, closing the book. "You've earned your keep for the day." "Hardly," she murmured, but didn't protest when he suggested she return to bed. That night, as Ryder again made his pallet on the floor, he found himself more troubled than ever. The newspaper article confirmed that Sophia Ellis was not who she claimed to be, or at least, not where she claimed to be going. Yet everything else about her, her intelligence, her resilience, even her stubbornness seemed genuine. Ryder, her voice came softly through the darkness. Yes. A pause then. Have you ever done something that seemed wrong to others but felt like your only choice? The question hung in the air, laden with implications. Ryder thought of battlefields where he'd made decisions that haunted him still, of the years after when he'd chosen isolation over connection. Yes, he answered finally, more times than I care to remember. Another silence, longer this time. Just when he thought she might have fallen asleep, she spoke again. I'm not who you think I am. Ryder stared up at the dark ceiling. I don't know who I think you are yet, Sophia Ellis. But I'm willing to listen when you're ready to tell me. Her only response was a shaky exhale, and soon after her breathing deepened into sleep. Ryder lay awake much longer, pondering the mystery of the woman in his bed, and why, despite every instinct warning him against entanglement, he felt increasingly drawn to her. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Sophia's strength returned gradually, and though her ribs still pained her, she insisted on contributing to the daily chores of the cabin. Ryder went about his ranch work, checking on cattle and repairing storm damage, always returning to find something changed in his sparse home. Shelves reorganized more efficiently, a stew simmering that tasted better than his own, or simply the presence of another person waiting with conversation and companionship. They spoke of books. Ryder had a surprising collection of classics and poetry that had sustained him through lonely winters, and swapped stories of places they'd seen. Sophia described Denver and St. Louis with vivid detail, while Ryder shared memories of Tennessee mountains and Georgia swamps, carefully editing out the worst horrors of war. What they didn't discuss was Sophia's past, her guardian, or her true destination. Ryder kept the newspaper hidden, telling himself he was waiting for her to trust him enough to share the truth. In reality, he found himself reluctant to confront the lies, as though doing so might break whatever fragile connection was growing between them. On the fourth morning, Ryder returned from checking his herd to find Sophia outside the cabin, attempting to hang laundry despite the obvious pain it caused her. "What are you doing?" he demanded, dismounting quickly. "You'll re-injure those ribs." "They need to heal through use," she countered, though her pale face betrayed her discomfort. "And your shirts needed washing." "My shirts were fine," Ryder said, taking the wet garment from her hands. "And they're certainly not worth you hurting yourself." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and both froze momentarily at the contact. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a flush coloring her cheeks that had nothing to do with exertion. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "You've done so much for me." "Then help by taking care of yourself," Ryder replied, his voice gentler than intended. "I didn't pull you from that ravine just to have you collapse from overexertion." A small smile curved her lips. "Are you always this bossy with guests?" "You're my first guest," he admitted, "so I suppose I'm establishing precedent." Her smile widened, transforming her face in a way that made Ryder's chest tighten inexplicably. "Well, since you're so concerned for my welfare, perhaps you could help me finish hanging these shirts, and then I promise to rest." Together they completed the task, working in a companionable silence that felt oddly natural. As Ryder pinned the last shirt to the line, he found himself studying Sophia's profile as she gazed across the rolling grasslands surrounding the cabin. "It's beautiful here," she said, tucking a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. "Lonely but beautiful." "It grows on you," Ryder said. "The quiet has its own voice if you listen long enough." Sophia glanced at him, her blue eyes thoughtful. "Is that why you came here?" "For the quiet." The question probed at wounds Ryder usually kept bandaged tightly, yet something about this woman made him want to answer honestly. "Partly," he acknowledged. "After the war, cities were too loud, too crowded, too many reminders." He gestured toward the open grassland. "Out here, a man can hear himself think. Can put some distance between himself and what he's done." "What did you do that needs such distance?" Sophia asked softly. Ryder's jaw tightened. "Survived when better men didn't." He expected her to offer platitudes or change the subject, as most did when confronted with the raw edges of a veteran's guilt. Instead, Sophia reached out hesitantly, her small hand coming to rest on his forearm. "The guilt of survival is a heavy burden," she said, "but it's not one you chose to carry." Their eyes met, and Ryder was struck by the understanding in hers, far deeper than her 20 years should allow. Before he could respond, the moment was broken by the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats. Ryder tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. Visitors were rare at the Lazy Q, especially unannounced ones. "Get inside," he said quietly. Sophia hesitated, then nodded, disappearing into the cabin. Ryder moved to the front of the house, positioning himself where he could observe the approaching rider while maintaining cover if needed. The horseman came into view over the eastern ridge, a lone figure on a dust-colored mare. As he drew closer, Ryder recognized Caleb Jensen, who ran the general store in Sweetwater and sometimes delivered mail and supplies to outlying ranches. "Quinn," Jensen called, raising a hand in greeting. "Brought your mail, figured you'd be stuck here after that storm." Ryder relaxed marginally, stepping forward to meet the storekeeper. "Jensen. Wasn't expecting anyone this way for at least another week." Jensen dismounted with a grunt, his ample girth making the movement less than graceful. "Would have waited, but there's a telegram came for you." Marked urgent, he reached into his saddlebag, extracting a yellowed envelope. "Everything hold up all right in the blow?" "Well enough," Ryder said, accepting the telegram with a frown. He rarely received correspondence of any kind, let alone urgent telegrams. "Lost a section of fence on the north side, but the cattle stayed put." "You were lucky then," Jensen said, glancing curiously toward the cabin. "The Petersons lost half their barn roof, and the bridge over Cottonwood Creek washed clean away." His eyes fell on the laundry line with its mix of men's shirts and a woman's dress. "Seems you've got company." Ryder hesitated, unsure how much to share. Before he could decide, the cabin door opened, and Sophia stepped out, her chin lifted in a show of confidence despite the oversized clothes and visible bandage at her temple. "Good afternoon," she said politely. Jensen's eyebrows shot up toward his balding pate, his gaze darting between Sophia and Ryder with undisguised curiosity. "Afternoon, miss." "This is Sophia Ellis," Ryder said, keeping his tone neutral. "Her wagon overturned in the storm. I found her and brought her here to recover." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Ellis," Sophia said with a small nod. "Jensen, Caleb Jensen." The storekeeper seemed flustered by her unexpected presence. "From Sweetwater, I run the general store there." "Sweetwater," Sophia repeated, a flicker of something crossing her face. "What a coincidence. I was headed there when my accident occurred." Jensen's expression brightened. "Were you now?" "Not many folks headed to Sweetwater unless they have specific business, or family." "My aunt lives there," Sophia said smoothly. "Margaret Ellis, perhaps you know her." A frown creased Jensen's forehead. "Ellis. Can't say as I recall any Ellis in Sweetwater, and I know most everyone in town." Ryder watched as Sophia's composed facade wavered slightly. "Perhaps she's on the outskirts," she suggested. She mentioned being somewhat removed from town in her letters. Jensen shrugged. "Could be. Some folks keep to themselves." He turned back to Ryder. "Well, I should be getting on. Storm left plenty of deliveries backed up." His gaze lingered curiously on Sophia. "If you need anything, miss, the store's open Tuesday through Saturday." "Thank you," Sophia replied with a tight smile. After Jensen had mounted and ridden off, an awkward silence fell between them. Ryder looked down at the telegram in his hand, then at Sophia, whose complexion had paled considerably. "There is no Aunt Margaret in Sweetwater, is there?" he asked quietly. Sophia's shoulders slumped slightly, the pretense dropping away. "No. And I'm guessing this has something to do with Harrison Thornton, the banker from Central City who was found murdered 2 weeks ago." At her startled look, Ryder added, "I found a newspaper with the article circled in your wagon." For a moment Sophia looked as though she might flee, her eyes darting toward the open prairie. Then with visible effort she steeled herself. "You must think I'm a murderer," she said softly. "I think you're running from something," Ryder corrected, "and I think you have your reasons." He held up the telegram. "Let me read this, then we'll talk, the whole truth this time." Inside the cabin, Ryder broke the seal on the telegram and unfolded the thin paper. As he read, his expression darkened. "RYDERQINN stop information received. You may be harboring SOPHIA, ELLIS stop woman WNTD for questioning and murder of Harrison Thornton. And theft of bank funds stop advise immediate detention and notification stop Sheriff James, MACINTOSH Central City, Colorado stop." He looked up to find Sophia watching him anxiously, her hands clasped tightly before her. "They think I killed him," she said, reading his expression, "and stole from the bank." "Did you," Ryder asked directly, "kill him?" "No." Her blue eyes held his unflinchingly. "Take money from the bank?" "Yes. But it wasn't theft, it was my inheritance." Money my father left for me that Harrison had been keeping from me for years. Ryder gestured for her to sit, and she sank into a chair at the table, her composure finally cracking. My father was a business partner of Harrison's before the war, she began, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. When he died at Gettysburg, he left everything to my mother and me. But mother fell ill the following winter, and before she died, she entrusted me to Harrison's guardianship. I was 14, with no other family. She took a shaky breath before continuing. At first, Harrison was kind. He gave me a home, education, everything a young woman could want materially. But as I grew older, I began to notice discrepancies in the accounts he showed me. Small amounts missing, investments that never seemed to yield returns despite the figures showing they should. You confronted him, Ryder guessed. Sophia nodded. 2 weeks ago, I'd finally pieced together enough evidence to prove he'd been systematically stealing from my inheritance for years, thousands of dollars that should have been mine. Her fingers twisted together nervously. I told him I knew and that I wanted my money and my independence. He laughed at first, then grew angry when he realized I had proof. He said no one would believe me over him, that he'd have me committed to an asylum if I tried to expose him. What happened next? Ryder prompted when she fell silent. I left his office, went home, and packed a small bag. I knew I needed help, someone with legal authority who wasn't under Harrison's influence. I decided to go to Denver to speak with a federal marshal there who had once been a friend of my father's. Her voice caught. But before I could leave, Harrison's housekeeper came to me, hysterical. She'd gone to bring him his evening meal and found him dead in his study, shot through the heart. And you ran, Ryder said, no judgment in his tone. What choice did I have? Sophia asked desperately. Everyone knew we'd argued earlier. His partners at the bank were all his friends. His death was convenient for someone. The embezzlement would never be discovered now, and I would be the perfect scapegoat. Her eyes dropped to her clasped hands. Before I fled, I went to the bank. I knew where Harrison kept certain records, and I knew the combination to the safe where my father's original investment documents were stored. I took only what was rightfully mine with the papers to prove it, but I knew how it would look. Ryder considered her story, weighing it against the fear and desperation he'd seen in her eyes that night in the storm. Either she was telling the truth or she was the most accomplished liar he'd ever encountered. Why Wyoming? He asked finally. Why not Denver to your father's friend? Because that's the first place they'd look, Sophia explained. I needed time to organize my thoughts, my evidence. I was heading north to Montana Territory. I have a distant cousin there who might help me. She gave a bitter laugh. Sweetwater was just a name I remembered passing on a map. I never expected to actually go there. Ryder paced the small confines of the cabin, the telegram crumpled in his fist. The law expected him to detain Sophia, to notify the authorities in Central City. The decent, law-abiding thing to do, yet as he looked at her, small but proud, frightened but refusing to crumble, he found himself unwilling to be the instrument of her capture. I believe you, he said finally, surprising himself with the realization that he meant it. But others won't be so easily convinced. Jensen's already suspicious, and once word spreads that you're here, it won't take long for someone to make the connection to the Central City case. Then I should leave, Sophia said, rising unsteadily. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, and I won't bring trouble to your door. Sit down, Ryder said firmly. You're in no condition to travel, and there's a marshal in Sweetwater who'd have you in custody before you made it 5 miles. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. We need a plan. We, Sophia echoed, hope and wariness mingling in her voice. Ryder met her gaze steadily. Yes, I didn't pull you from that storm just to throw you to wolves of a different kind. He folded the telegram and tucked it into his pocket. First, we need to establish your presence here as something other than suspicious. If people believe you belong at the Lazy Q, they'll be less likely to connect you with a fugitive from Colorado. How do we do that? A muscle worked in Ryder's jaw as he considered their limited options. There's only one way that won't raise eyebrows. We tell people we're married. Sophia's eyes widened. Married. A hasty wedding explains why no one's heard of you before, Ryder explained, the plan forming as he spoke. We'll say we met when I was in Cheyenne last month, married quickly, and you were on your way to join me when the storm hit. Your wagon accident happened closer to the ranch than where I actually found you. But that's improper. Scandalous, Ryder raised an eyebrow. less scandalous than your current situation, living unchaperoned with a bachelor, and far less dangerous than being arrested for murder. Sophia fell silent, considering. What about when people realize I'm not actually your wife? By then, you'll either be well enough to continue to Montana with your evidence, or will have found a way to clear your name, Ryder said. It's temporary, just a way to buy time and protection. She studied him, confusion evident in her expression. Why would you do this? Risk your reputation, possibly even legal trouble, for someone you barely know? It was a valid question, one Ryder had been asking himself. The frontier had taught him to mind his own business, to avoid entanglements that could threaten his hard-won peace. Yet something about Sophia Ellis, her courage, her intelligence, the way she'd faced adversity with dignity, had breached defenses he'd thought impenetrable. Maybe I'm tired of standing aside, he said finally. Or maybe I just believe you deserve better than being condemned without a fair hearing. He paused, then added more softly, everyone deserves that much. A long moment passed between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, Sophia nodded. All right, she agreed. For now, I'm Sophia Quinn. The following days brought a flurry of activity as they prepared to present their fabricated marriage to the world. Ryder made a trip to Sweetwater, ostensibly for supplies but actually to casually mention his recent marriage to a girl from Cheyenne who would be joining him soon. The news spread through town like wildfire, just as he'd intended. By the time he returned to the Lazy Q, he'd received a dozen congratulations and as many curious inquiries about his mysterious bride. Meanwhile, Sophia worked to transform the bachelor cabin into something that might plausibly be a newlywed home. She rearranged furniture, added touches from her salvaged possessions, and managed to make curtains from an old tablecloth found in Ryder's trunk. The simple changes gave the cabin a warmth it had never possessed. You're good at this, Ryder observed one evening, returning from chores to find the cabin swept, a bunch of wildflowers in a jar on the table, and something delicious simmering on the stove. Creating a home. Sophia looked up from the shirt she was mending, a hint of pride in her smile. I've had plenty of practice making the best of situations. Harrison was generous with things but not with warmth. I learned to create my own comforts. The casual mention of her guardian reminded them both of the precarious nature of their arrangement. Sophia's expression sobered. Have you heard anything more from Central City? Ryder shook his head. Nothing yet. But news travels slowly out here, especially with the roads still recovering from the storm. How long do you think we have? She asked. A few weeks, maybe a month, Ryder estimated. By then, your ribs should be healed enough for travel, if that's still what you want. If that's still what you want, the words hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to address. In just over a week, their pretense had begun to feel strangely natural, sharing meals, working side by side, exchanging stories in the evenings by the fire. Ryder found himself returning to the cabin earlier than necessary each day, drawn by the simple pleasure of having someone waiting for him. For her part, Sophia seemed to bloom in the security of the Lazy Q. The fear that had shadowed her eyes gradually receded, replaced by a quiet contentment as she immersed herself in the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to collect eggs from the few chickens Ryder kept, to churn butter, and even to make basic repairs around the cabin. Her intelligent questions about cattle and land management revealed a quick mind that Ryder increasingly admired. Their sleeping arrangements remained strictly proper, Ryder on his pallet on the floor, Sophia in the bed, but an undeniable current of awareness had begun to flow between them. Ryder caught himself watching the graceful movements of her hands as she cooked, or the way sunlight caught in her honey-blonde hair when she stepped outside. More than once, he'd looked up to find her studying him with a similar intensity, only to glance away quickly when their eyes met. The first test of their charade came sooner than expected. 10 days after Jensen's visit, Ryder spotted a wagon approaching from the direction of Sweetwater. He quickly alerted Sophia, who was hanging laundry behind the cabin. Visitors, he said tersely. Remember, we've been married 3 weeks. You're still recovering from the wagon accident that happened just after you arrived. Sophia nodded, smoothing her hair and straightening the dress she'd managed to clean and mend after the storm. Who is it? Looks like the Reeds, Ryder replied, recognizing the wagon. Martha and Daniel. They have the closest ranch to ours, about 5 miles west. Good people, but Martha's the biggest gossip in 3 counties. Wonderful, Sophia muttered, just what we need. Despite her nervousness, when the wagon pulled up to the cabin, Sophia presented a picture of demure wifeliness that almost made Ryder laugh. Her eyes, however, flashed him a warning as the visitors climbed down from their wagon. Ryder Quinn, Martha Reed called, a plump, energetic woman in her 40s with a perpetually curious expression. We came as soon as the creek went down enough to cross. Is it true? Jensen said you'd gone and gotten yourself a wife without telling a soul. It's true, Martha, Ryder confirmed, stepping forward to help her down from the wagon while Daniel secured the horses. Though I'd planned to introduce her properly once she was settled. Martha's attention was already fixed on Sophia, who stood in the doorway of the cabin. My goodness, Jensen wasn't exaggerating about the accident. You poor dear, you look like you've been through the wars. She bustled forward, taking Sophia's hands in her own. Martha Reed, honey, my husband Daniel and I are your closest neighbors, though close is relative out here. Sophia, she replied with a warm smile that revealed no hint of their deception. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Ryder. Martha, please, the older woman insisted. We don't stand on ceremony in these parts. Now you must tell me everything. Ryder's been the most confirmed bachelor in Wyoming territory for years, and suddenly he returns from Cheyenne with a wife. It's the most exciting thing to happen around here since the Jensen twins were born backwards. Daniel Reed, a taciturn man with kind eyes, nodded to Ryder. Congratulations. Surprised us all. Sometimes you just know, Ryder said, the words coming more easily than expected. He glanced at Sophia, finding a softness in her expression that made his pulse quicken. When it's right, it's right. Well, come in, Sophia invited, playing her role perfectly. I've just made coffee and there's bread from this morning. Inside the cabin, Martha's sharp eyes missed nothing. From the curtains at the windows to the way, the bed now boasted a patchwork quilt Sophia had pieced together from salvaged fabric. You've certainly brought a woman's touch to this place, Martha approved. It was like a monk's cell when I visited last fall. Sophia has a gift for making anywhere feel like home, Ryder said, the genuine admiration in his voice surprising him. As they sat around the table with coffee and bread, Martha's questions came in a steady stream. How had they met? At the general store in Cheyenne where Sophia had been purchasing books. Why the quick wedding? When you know, and life is uncertain on the frontier. Where was Sophia from originally? Pennsylvania originally, but Colorado more recently. Sophia fielded each query with a composure that impressed Ryder, weaving truth and fiction so seamlessly that even he sometimes forgot which was which. She spoke of her deceased parents truthfully, glossed over her time with her uncle in Colorado, and expressed sincere enthusiasm for building a life at the Lazy Q and children. Martha asked with the directness of a frontier woman. Will you be starting a family soon? Sophia choked slightly on her coffee and Ryder felt heat rise in his face. We're taking our time, he managed, getting to know each other first. Wise, Daniel commented, his first contribution to the conversation. No rush. Martha looked disappointed but rallied quickly. Well, when you do decide, you let me know. I've delivered half the babies in this county and I've never lost a mother or child yet. Her expression softened as she looked between them. Though I must say, you two already look at each other like you've been married years instead of weeks. It does my heart good to see Ryder with someone who brings light to his eyes. Ryder's gaze met Sophia's across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement perhaps that not all of their performance was pretense. After the Reeds departed, promising to spread word of Sophia's recovery and extending an invitation to Sunday dinner when she felt strong enough to travel, a strange silence fell over the cabin. The ease they'd developed over the past days seemed suddenly strained, as though Martha's observations had forced them to confront feelings neither was prepared to examine. You were convincing, Ryder said finally, clearing away the coffee cups. They didn't suspect anything. You were too, Sophia replied quietly, especially the part about knowing when something's right. Ryder looked up, finding her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Some lies come easier than others, he said carefully. Yes, she agreed, holding his gaze. Some do. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility, until Sophia winced, pressing a hand to her ribs. You've overdone it today, Ryder said, concern replacing the tension. You should rest. I'm fine, she protested, though the pallor of her face suggested otherwise. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was no heat in the words. At least sit while I finish these dishes. She complied, settling into a chair with a sigh. Do you think they believed us, truly? Martha did, Ryder confirmed. And what Martha believes, everyone believes. By this time tomorrow, our marriage will be accepted fact throughout the county. And when I leave, Sophia asked softly, what will you tell them then? The question hit Ryder with unexpected force. The thought of Sophia leaving, of returning to his solitary existence after these weeks of companionship, created a hollow feeling in his chest that he wasn't prepared for. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he said, his back to her as he worked. Focus on getting well first. Later that night, as he lay on his pallet listening to Sophia's even breathing from the bed, Ryder confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling for Sophia Ellis, not the pretend wife they'd created for public consumption, but the real woman, complicated, brave, intelligent, and carrying secrets that could destroy both of them. The revelation should have sent him running for the hills. Instead, it settled into his chest with the weight of inevitability, like the final piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of domestic tranquility, occasionally punctuated by moments of startling intimacy. As Sophia's ribs healed and her strength returned, she took on more responsibilities around the ranch, learning to ride the gentle mare Ryder kept for occasional use, and even helping with the spring cattle count from horseback. Their performance as newlyweds grew more convincing with each passing day, not through conscious effort but through the natural rhythm they developed together. Ryder found himself reaching for her hand without thinking, or standing closer than strictly necessary when they had visitors. Sophia, for her part, learned to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, setting out clean clothes after his morning chores or preparing his coffee exactly as he preferred it. The pretense began to blur with reality in ways that neither acknowledged openly but both felt keenly. At night, the distance between Ryder's pallet and Sophia's bed seemed both vast and insufficient. Visitors came with increasing frequency as word of Ryder Quinn's surprising marriage spread through the county. Each time, Sophia played her role flawlessly, charming even the most skeptical with her quiet intelligence and genuine interest in frontier life. Ryder watched with pride as she was gradually accepted into the small community, women who had barely acknowledged his existence now stopping by with preserves or sewing patterns for the new missus. Quinn. It was during the 3rd week after Jensen's visit that the first ominous note sounded in their harmonious arrangement. Ryder returned from town with mail and supplies to find Sophia white-faced on the porch, a newspaper clutched in her hands. "Where did you get that?" he asked, dismounting quickly. "Mrs. Peterson brought it," Sophia said, her voice strained. "She thought I might enjoy news from home." Ryder took the paper, the Cheyenne Daily Sun, and scanned the front page. There below an article about railroad expansion was a smaller headline, "Murder Suspect Still at Large, Reward Offered." The brief article described Sophia as a person of interest in the murder of Harrison Thornton, noted that she had fled with a substantial sum from his bank, and announced a $500 reward for information leading to her apprehension. The description was unsettlingly accurate, down to the honey-blonde hair and blue eyes. "It won't take long for someone to make the connection," Sophia said quietly. "Martha Reed already commented on how unusual my eye color is." Ryder folded the paper carefully. "We knew this might happen." "I should leave," Sophia said, rising from her seat. "Tonight before anyone else sees this. The longer I stay, the more danger I put you in." "No," Ryder said firmly. "Running now would only confirm suspicions. Besides, you're stronger but not strong enough for hard travel, especially alone." "I can't let you risk yourself for me," Sophia insisted. "Harboring a fugitive, they could take your land, everything you've worked for." Ryder stepped closer, taking her trembling hands in his. "Sophia, listen to me. We knew this day would come. I've been preparing." He searched her face. "Do you trust me?" The question hung between them, weighted with all they'd shared and all they hadn't said. Finally, Sophia nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." "Then give me a few more days," Ryder requested. "There's someone I need to contact in Denver, a man I served with during the war who now works for the Justice Department. If anyone can help clear your name, it's him." Hope flickered in Sophia's eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "Even if he believes me, the evidence." "You said you have documents proving the money was rightfully yours," Ryder reminded her. "And someone killed Thornton. If it wasn't you, then finding the real murderer is our best chance." "Our," Sophia repeated softly. "You keep saying that." Ryder's hands tightened around hers. "Because that's what it is, our problem. Our solution," he hesitated, then added, "our future if you want it to be." Sophia's eyes widened at the implication. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention to the road. 3 men on horseback were approaching the ranch at a gallop, dust billowing behind them. "Get inside," Ryder said urgently, recognizing the lead rider as Deputy Marshal Fletcher from Sweetwater. "And hide your documents just in case." Sophia disappeared into the cabin while Ryder stepped forward to meet the approaching lawman, his posture deliberately relaxed despite the tension coiling through him. "Deputy," he greeted as the men reined in before him, "something I can help you with." Fletcher, a lean man with a perpetually sour expression, dismounted stiffly. "Quinn. Got some questions for you." His gaze moved past Ryder to the cabin. "And your wife." The way he emphasized the last word sent a chill through Ryder. "My wife's resting. She's still recovering from her accident." "Convenient accident," Fletcher remarked. "Happened right when you supposedly got married, which nobody knew about until after, and right when a certain young woman went missing from Colorado." He pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Young woman who looks an awful lot like your wife, according to this description. Honey blonde hair, blue eyes, about 20 years old." "You're describing half the women in the territory," Ryder said evenly. "My wife's name is Sophia Quinn, formerly Ellis. We were married in Cheyenne last month. I have the certificate to prove it." This at least was true. During his last trip to town, Ryder had paid a significant sum to have a backdated marriage certificate created, complete with forged signatures from a pastor who had conveniently moved on to Oregon. It wouldn't withstand intense scrutiny, but it might buy them time. "I'd like to see that certificate," Fletcher said, "and I'd like to speak with your wife." Before Ryder could respond, the cabin door opened and Sophia stepped out. She had composed herself remarkably, her face calm though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Deputy Fletcher," she said, coming to stand beside Ryder, "is something wrong?" Fletcher studied her intently. "Ma'am. Sorry to disturb you, but we've received information about a fugitive from Colorado who matches your description rather closely." "How alarming," Sophia said, slipping her hand into Ryder's with a naturalness that spoke of long familiarity. "What has this person done?" "Murder and theft," Fletcher said bluntly, watching for her reaction. "Killed her guardian and stole a fortune from his bank in Central City." Sophia's gasp of shock was perfectly executed. "How terrible." "No wonder you're concerned," she glanced up at Ryder. "Darling, didn't you say you had business in Central City last year? Perhaps you encountered this woman." Ryder squeezed her hand in silent appreciation of her quick thinking. "Different circles entirely, I expect. I was there about cattle, not banking." Fletcher's eyes narrowed at their easy exchange. "When exactly did you two meet?" "February," they answered simultaneously. "In Cheyenne," Sophia added. "I was visiting friends there after leaving my uncle's home in Colorado. My parents died during the war, you see, and my uncle had been my guardian. When he passed last winter, I decided to make a fresh start." The story was close enough to truth to sound convincing, with just enough detail to satisfy without raising further questions. "And you fell in love so quickly you married within what, a month?" Fletcher's skepticism was evident. Ryder's arm slid around Sophia's waist, drawing her closer. "When you know, Deputy. I'd spent enough years alone to recognize what I wanted when I found it." Something in his tone must have carried conviction, because Fletcher's expression softened marginally. "Well, I'll still need to see that marriage certificate, and I may have more questions later. The reward for this fugitive is substantial, and we're checking every new arrival in the territory." "Of course," Sophia said graciously. "Ryder, why don't you show Deputy Fletcher the certificate while I put on some coffee? You and your men must be thirsty after your ride." Her composure impressed Ryder as much as it seemed to disarm Fletcher. While Sophia busied herself inside, Ryder retrieved the forged certificate from a locked box in his trunk. Fletcher examined it carefully, but the quality of the forgery held up under his scrutiny. "Seems in order," he admitted reluctantly. "Pastor Williamson, you say? Don't know him." "New to Cheyenne when we met him," Ryder explained. "Had a small congregation near the edge of town. I understand he's moved on since." Fletcher grunted, returning the certificate. "Convenient." The implication hung in the air between them, but without evidence to contradict the document, Fletcher had no grounds for further action. He accepted coffee from Sophia, and the conversation shifted to more general topics: the spring weather, cattle prices, news from the East carried in recent newspapers. Throughout it all, Sophia maintained her role with a grace that impressed even Ryder, who knew the fear she must be suppressing. She spoke of Pennsylvania, where she had indeed grown up, described books she'd read recently, and even mentioned how eager she was to start a garden once she was fully recovered from her accident. By the time the lawmen departed, even Fletcher seemed half convinced by their performance, though he warned that he might return if additional information came to light. As the riders disappeared down the road, Sophia's carefully maintained composure crumbled. She sank onto the porch steps, trembling visibly. "You were magnificent," Ryder said quietly, sitting beside her. "I was terrified," she confessed. "I kept thinking they would see right through me, that at any moment Fletcher would produce handcuffs and drag me away." "You didn't show it," Ryder assured her, covering her cold hand with his. "But this confirms what we already knew: we're running out of time. The description in that newspaper was too accurate. Someone will make the connection eventually, despite our precautions." "What do we do?" Sophia asked, turning to him with desperate eyes. Ryder made a decision he'd been contemplating for days. "Tomorrow I ride for Denver. My friend there, James Hollister, was a detective before the war and now works for the Department of Justice. If anyone can help untangle this mess, it's him." "Denver's 4 days' hard ride," Sophia said. "What if someone comes while you're gone?" "Martha Reed has invited you to stay with them while I'm away on business," Ryder explained. "I've already arranged it. You'll be safer there than alone here, and Martha's presence will lend you additional legitimacy as my wife." Sophia nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom of the plan despite her evident reluctance to be separated from him. "And if your friend can't help, or won't?" Ryder's jaw tightened. "Then we move to the second plan. I have money set aside, enough to get us to Canada if necessary. If I'm not back within 2 weeks, Martha has instructions to help you retrieve it from where it's hidden." "Us?" Sophia repeated, her voice catching. "You would leave everything, your land, your home, to go on the run with me?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had been brave enough to voice until now. Ryder turned to face her fully, his eyes holding hers. "Yes," he said simply, "I would." "Why?" Sophia whispered, though her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. Instead of responding with words, Ryder leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed his lips against hers in a kiss as gentle as it was brief. He drew back slightly, studying her face. "That's why," he said softly. For a moment Sophia remained perfectly still, her blue eyes wide and searching. Then she lifted a hand to his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with wonder. "I never expected," she began. "Neither did I," Ryder admitted. "The frontier's no place for attachment, that's what I always told myself. People come and go, they die or leave, caring just gives you more to lose." He caught her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And then there was you, and suddenly all those careful rules I'd made didn't matter anymore." "I'm still who I was when you found me," Sophia reminded him. "A woman accused of murder, on the run, with no certainty of clearing my name." "And I'm still the man who pulled you from that ravine," Ryder countered. "Nothing's changed except that now I know you, your courage, your mind, your heart. And knowing you has changed me, Sophia, for the better." The conviction in his voice seemed to reach something deep within her. Sophia leaned forward, initiating a second kiss that held nothing back. Ryder's arms came around her, drawing her closer as the last barriers between them dissolved in the warmth of shared feeling. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Sophia rested her forehead against his. "I never expected to find something worth risking everything for," she confessed. "Not after everything that happened with Harrison." "But you," she shook her head slightly, wonder in her voice. "You make me believe in possibilities I'd given up on." "Then believe in this one," Ryder said, his voice husky with emotion. "We'll find a way through. Together." Dawn found Ryder preparing for his journey to Denver, packing saddlebags with provisions while Sophia stood nearby, concern evident in her expression despite her efforts to remain positive. 4 days there, perhaps 2 or 3 with Hollister if he agrees to help, then 4 back, Ryder calculated. Just under 2 weeks if all goes well. "And if it doesn't?" Sophia asked softly. Ryder straightened, reaching out to brush a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face. "Then I ride straight back to get you and we leave together." His expression grew serious. "I meant what I said yesterday, Sophia. Whatever happens, we face it together from now on." The declaration hung between them, both a promise and a question. Sophia answered by rising on tiptoe to kiss him, her hands gripping his shirt as though afraid he might disappear. "Be careful," she whispered against his mouth. "Come back to me." I will, Ryder promised, holding her gaze. Nothing could keep me away. The ride to the Reed Ranch was tense but uneventful. Martha welcomed Sophia with characteristic enthusiasm, clearly delighted to have another woman under her roof, even temporarily. Daniel merely nodded at Ryder's explanation about urgent business in Denver, though his shrewd eyes suggested he suspected there was more to the story. "She'll be safe here," Daniel assured Ryder as they stood by the corral, out of earshot of the women. "Any trouble comes, I know how to handle it." Ryder clasped the older man's hand gratefully. "Thank you, I wouldn't leave if it wasn't important." Daniel studied him thoughtfully. "Known you 3 years, Quinn. Never seen you look at anything the way you look at that girl. Some things are worth fighting for." The simple statement from a man of few words affected Ryder deeply. "Yes," he agreed. "They are." Saying goodbye to Sophia proved harder than Ryder had anticipated. They stood together on the Reed's porch, acutely aware of the dangers that might prevent them from reuniting. "Remember," Ryder said quietly, 2 weeks. "If I'm not back, the money's in." "The hollow oak by the creek," Sophia finished. "I remember, but you'll be back." Her certainty bolstered his own confidence. With a final kiss that drew a delighted gasp from Martha watching through the window, Ryder mounted and rode south toward Denver, his thoughts already racing ahead to what awaited him there. The journey proved as grueling as expected. Spring storms drenched the trail on the second day, turning packed earth to treacherous mud that slowed progress considerably. Ryder pushed on regardless, stopping only when necessary to rest his horse, determined to reach Denver as quickly as possible. He arrived on the morning of the 5th day, exhausted and mud-splattered, drawing curious glances as he made his way through the bustling streets to the federal building where Hollister worked. The clerk at the front desk initially refused him entry until Ryder mentioned their shared service in the 4th Cavalry. Minutes later, James Hollister himself appeared, older, grayer, but with the same keen intelligence in his eyes that had made him a formidable detective before the war and an invaluable scout during it. "Quinn," he greeted, genuine warmth in his handshake. "When they said a half-drowned cowboy was asking for me by name, I should have known it would be you." His smile faded as he noted Ryder's haggard appearance. "This isn't a social call, I take it." "No," Ryder confirmed. "I need your help, James. It's complicated and potentially legally problematic." Understanding immediately, Hollister led him to a private office, closed the door, and listened without interruption as Ryder explained Sophia's situation, his own involvement, and their growing certainty that she had been framed for Thornton's murder. When Ryder finished, Hollister leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're certain she's telling the truth, about the embezzlement, the confrontation, all of it?" "As certain as I've ever been about anything," Ryder confirmed. Hollister studied him, then nodded slowly. "You always were a good judge of character, and this banker Thornton, his reputation was spotless. According to Sophia, he was highly respected in Central City. His partners at the bank are among the town's elite, which would make them perfectly positioned to cover up financial improprieties," Hollister mused, "and the girl has evidence. Actual documentation of her inheritance and Thornton's mismanagement." "Yes," Ryder confirmed. "Account ledgers, her father's original investment papers, letters." Hollister drummed his fingers on his desk thoughtfully. "There's something else to consider. 3 weeks ago, a banker in Boulder was found dead in similar circumstances, shot through the heart in his office after hours. Local authorities treated it as a robbery gone wrong, but—" "You think they might be connected?" Ryder asked, hope kindling. "It's possible," Hollister acknowledged. "The timing is suggestive. If Thornton was involved in something larger, something that might have gotten him killed, then Miss Ellis may indeed have been a convenient scapegoat." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "This won't be simple, Quinn. The murder charge comes from local authorities in Central City, not federal jurisdiction. I can't simply wave my badge and make it disappear." Ryder's heart sank. "Then there's nothing you can do." "I didn't say that," Hollister corrected. "I have contacts in Central City, including a deputy marshal who owes me a favor, and I can initiate an investigation into the financial aspects. Bank fraud falls under federal purview, especially if it crosses territorial lines." Hope flickered again in Ryder's chest. "How long would this take?" "Longer than you want, shorter than the alternative," Hollister said candidly. "At minimum, a month to gather enough evidence to challenge the existing narrative. Potentially longer if the corruption runs deep." "A month," Ryder repeated, calculating swiftly. Winter will be setting in by then, making travel north difficult if not impossible. You're serious about this girl, Hollister observed, studying his friend's face. Serious enough to risk everything. It wasn't a question, but Ryder answered anyway, yes. A small smile touched Hollister's lips. Never thought I'd see the day. The same man who swore he'd never let anyone close again after Gettysburg. People change, Ryder said simply. Indeed they do, Hollister agreed. He leaned forward, decision made. All right, here's what we'll do. I'll send telegrams today to my contacts in Central City and Boulder, start the official wheels turning. Meanwhile, I need you to get the girl's evidence here as quickly and discreetly as possible. Without it, we have nothing but her word against established authorities. You want me to bring Sophia to Denver? Ryder asked, alarmed at the thought of bringing her so close to where she was wanted. Not necessarily her, just the documentation, Hollister clarified. Though eventually, yes, she'll need to testify if we're to clear her name completely. Ryder considered the logistics, weighing risks against necessity. I'll get the evidence to you within 2 weeks, he promised. Good, Hollister nodded. In the meantime, keep her somewhere safe. The reward for her capture has doubled since that newspaper article, and bounty hunters aren't known for asking questions before shooting. The warning sent a chill through Ryder. I'll protect her. I know you will, Hollister said, his expression softening slightly. For what it's worth, Quinn, I believe you about her innocence. The pattern fits too well with other cases we've been investigating, respected businessmen using their positions to siphon funds, particularly from accounts belonging to women or minors who have limited legal recourse. Then you'll help us, Ryder confirmed, hardly daring to hope. I'll help, Hollister agreed, for justice's sake and for yours. He rose, extending his hand. Get some rest tonight. You look like you've been dragged behind your horse rather than riding it. We'll meet again tomorrow to finalize details. That night, in a modest hotel room paid for with Hollister's assistance, Ryder slept better than he had since leaving Sophia. Hope, fragile but real, had replaced the desperate determination that had driven him to Denver. They had an ally now, a powerful one, and a path forward that didn't involve abandoning everything and fleeing to Canada. The following morning, he and Hollister spent hours mapping out a strategy. Telegrams were dispatched, contacts activated, and a secure method established for transferring Sophia's evidence once Ryder returned with it. By midday, he was ready to begin the journey home, his spirits considerably lighter than when he'd arrived. Be careful, Hollister warned as they parted. This won't stay quiet for long. Once my inquiries reach Central City, whoever framed Miss Ellis will know someone's asking questions. I'll be watching for trouble, Ryder assured him. See that you do, Hollister replied. I'd hate to lose you just when you finally found something worth living for. The return journey to Wyoming seemed to take an eternity despite Ryder pushing his horse to its limits. Every mile that separated him from Sophia felt like a personal failure, every delay an opportunity for disaster to strike in his absence. By the time he crossed into Wyoming territory on the 4th day, he was operating on determination alone, his body long since exhausted beyond normal endurance. It was nearly sunset when he finally reached the Reed Ranch, his horse lathered and trembling with fatigue. Daniel Reed emerged from the barn as Ryder rode in, his weathered face creased with concern. Quinn, he greeted. Was beginning to wonder if you'd run into trouble. Some delays on the trail, Ryder explained, dismounting stiffly. His legs nearly buckled, unaccustomed to solid ground after so many hours in the saddle. How is she? Daniel's expression tightened. Better you see for yourself. Alarm coursed through Ryder as he followed Daniel toward the house. What's happened? Is Sophia hurt? Not hurt, Daniel assured him, but there've been developments. Martha will explain. Inside the cozy farmhouse, Martha Reed looked up from her knitting, her normally cheerful face somber. Ryder, thank goodness, we were starting to worry. Where's Sophia? Ryder demanded, too exhausted and anxious for pleasantries. Martha exchanged a glance with her husband. She's resting in the spare room. There was an incident 3 days ago. Deputy Fletcher came back with more questions and a poster from Central City. It had her picture on it, Ryder. There's no mistaking it's her. Cold dread settled in Ryder's stomach. What happened? Fletcher was convinced she's the fugitive they're looking for, Martha continued. He wanted to take her in for questioning. Daniel managed to convince him to leave her here under our supervision until you returned, but it was a near thing. She's been beside herself with worry, barely sleeping. Did Fletcher telegraph Central City? Ryder asked urgently. No, Daniel answered, convinced him to wait for you out of respect for a fellow veteran. But he won't wait much longer, Quinn. He's coming back tomorrow. Relief and renewed anxiety warred within Ryder. I need to see her. Martha nodded, rising. I'll take you to her. She's probably not sleeping anyway, poor thing. She led the way down a short hallway to a closed door, knocking softly. Sophia, there's someone here to see you. The door opened immediately, revealing Sophia in a borrowed nightgown, her honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. When she saw Ryder, a small cry escaped her lips before she launched herself into his arms. You're here, she whispered against his chest. You came back. Ryder held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent with the desperation of a drowning man finding air. I promised I would. Martha discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her to give them privacy. For several long moments, they simply clung to each other, reaffirming through touch what words couldn't adequately express. Finally, Sophia pulled back slightly, her hands framing his face as she studied him. You look exhausted. I'm fine, Ryder assured her, though in truth he was swaying slightly on his feet. Martha told me about Fletcher. Are you all right? Sophia nodded, guiding him to sit on the edge of the small bed. I was terrified when he showed me the poster, she admitted. It's from when Harrison hosted a charity ball last Christmas. I was wearing the blue dress he gave me, the one that matched my eyes, he said. Her voice caught. He had it all planned, didn't he, making sure there would be a clear picture to identify me by later. We don't know that, Ryder said, though privately he suspected she was right. But I do have news. Hollister believes you. He's starting an investigation into Thornton and his banking associates. Hope bloomed in Sophia's eyes. Truly, he can help us. It will take time, Ryder cautioned. A month, possibly longer, and he needs your evidence, the documents proving your inheritance and Thornton's embezzlement. They're hidden in my trunk at the cabin, Sophia said. In a false bottom I can show you. Ryder nodded, thinking quickly. We'll need to leave tonight before Fletcher returns tomorrow, get back to the Lazy Q, retrieve the documents, then decide our next move. He stood, fighting the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. Can you be ready in an hour? Determination replaced the fear in Sophia's expression. I'm ready now. True to her word, Sophia was dressed and packed within minutes. The Reeds, understanding the urgency if not all the details, provided fresh horses and provisions. Martha hugged Sophia tightly before they departed. Whatever the truth is, she whispered, I know a good heart when I meet one. Be safe, child. Daniel drew Ryder aside as they prepared to leave. Fletcher won't be pleased when he finds you've gone, he warned. He'll likely come looking. I know, Ryder acknowledged. We just need enough time to get the evidence to Denver. After that, he shrugged, leaving the future unspoken. Daniel nodded gravely. I'll delay him as long as I can, buy you a day, maybe more. Thank you, Ryder said, clasping the older man's hand, for everything. They rode through the night, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main road where they might be spotted. Sophia kept pace without complaint despite the difficult terrain, her determination matching Ryder's own. Dawn was breaking as they finally approached the Lazy Q, the familiar silhouette of the cabin, a welcome sight after so many days away. Home, Sophia murmured as they dismounted in the yard, then caught herself. Your home, I mean. Ryder's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Our home, he corrected, for as long as you want it to be. Inside the cabin, everything remained as they'd left it, though a fine layer of dust had settled over the furnishings in their absence. While Sophia retrieved her documents from the false bottom of her trunk, Ryder quickly gathered essential supplies. They had decided during the ride to return to Denver together. Sophia's evidence was too important to trust to anyone else's care, and Ryder refused to leave her behind again. Here, Sophia said, emerging from behind the privacy screen with a small leather portfolio. Everything's here, the original investment papers from my father, copies of accounts showing the discrepancies, letters from Harrison to my mother after father died promising to safeguard our interests. Ryder examined the documents, impressed by the meticulous record-keeping. Hollister will be able to use these. They establish a clear pattern of deception. But not murder, Sophia pointed out, her voice tight with anxiety. These prove financial wrongdoing, not that Harrison was killed by someone else. It's a start, Ryder assured her. And Hollister mentioned something else, a similar murder in Boulder just before Thornton's death, if they're connected. Then it wasn't about me at all, Sophia realized. I was just convenient. Exactly, Ryder confirmed. Rest for a few hours while I prepare the horses for the journey to Denver. We'll leave at nightfall, less chance of being seen that way. Though clearly reluctant to delay even briefly, Sophia admitted she needed rest after their night ride. She settled onto the bed while Ryder secured the cabin and tended to the horses, making sure they would be fresh for the demanding journey ahead. He had just finished packing saddlebags with provisions when hoofbeats in the yard alerted him to visitors. Drawing his revolver, Ryder moved cautiously to the barn door, peering out at the approaching riders. His blood ran cold at the sight of Deputy Marshal Fletcher and two other men, all armed, approaching the cabin. Quickly, Ryder slipped back to where the horses were stabled, calculating options. The barn had a rear exit that led to the creek, possibly offering a path to escape, but Sophia was in the cabin, likely asleep, unaware of the danger. Cursing silently, he crept along the side of the barn, staying in shadow as he made his way toward the cabin. He reached the back door just as he heard Fletcher's voice from the front porch. "Quinn, open up. This is official business." Inside, Ryder found Sophia already awake and alert, the leather portfolio clutched to her chest, her face pale but resolute. "Fletcher," she whispered, "he's found us." Ryder nodded grimly, back door now. Quietly, together they slipped out the rear of the cabin, crouching low to avoid being seen through windows. They had almost reached the cover of a stand of cottonwoods when a shout went up. "There. Behind the cabin." "Run," Ryder urged, pushing Sophia ahead of him as gunshots split the air. They sprinted for the tree line, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. Once among the trees, they paused only long enough to catch their breath. "The barn's too exposed now," Ryder panted. "We'll follow the creek south, try to circle back for the horses after dark." Sophia nodded, clutching the portfolio tightly. Her face was scratched from branches, her borrowed dress torn at the hem, but determination blazed in her eyes. "I'm not going back to face a hanging for something I didn't do," she said fiercely. "No," Ryder agreed, taking her free hand. "You're not." They moved swiftly along the creek bed, using the high banks for cover whenever possible. Behind them, they could hear Fletcher and his deputies crashing through the underbrush, though the sounds gradually grew fainter as distance and the rushing water masked their trail. By midday, they had covered several miles. Following the meandering creek away from the lazy queue, exhaustion began to take its toll, particularly on Ryder, who had barely rested since his return from Denver. When they reached a sheltered hollow created by a fallen cottonwood, Sophia insisted they stop. "You can't go on without rest," she said firmly, guiding him to sit against the trunk. "You've been riding for days with barely any sleep." Too tired to argue, Ryder settled into the makeshift shelter, pulling Sophia down beside him. She curled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, the portfolio still clutched protectively in her arms. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, "for you to lose everything because of me." Ryder's arm tightened around her. "I haven't lost everything," he countered. "The lazy queue is just land and timber. It can be rebuilt, or I can start over somewhere else." He turned to look into her eyes. "But you, Sophia Ellis, you I can't replace." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, profound in its honesty. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she leaned forward to press her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't: gratitude, regret, and something deeper, something that had grown between them despite the chaos surrounding them. "I love you," she said when they finally parted, the words soft but unwavering. "I need you to know that, whatever happens next." "I know," Ryder replied, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "I've known it for a while now. And I love you, Sophia. Enough to follow you anywhere, fight anyone who tries to harm you, and never regret a moment of it." They rested through the hottest part of the day, taking turns keeping watch while the other slept. As evening approached, they began moving again, circling back toward the lazy queue under cover of lengthening shadows. Night had fallen by the time they reached the edge of Ryder's property. The cabin stood dark and apparently deserted, though both remained wary of a trap. They observed from the shelter of trees for over an hour, seeing no movement or sign of Fletcher's presence. "Could be waiting inside," Ryder whispered. "Or they might have given up, gone for reinforcements," Sophia suggested. "We need those horses if we're going to reach Denver." After careful deliberation, they decided Ryder would approach the barn alone while Sophia remained hidden. If all seemed clear, he would bring the horses to her position rather than risking her exposure. Moving silently through familiar terrain, Ryder reached the barn without incident. The horses were still there, seemingly undisturbed. He quickly saddled them, leading them quietly out the rear exit where they wouldn't be visible from the cabin or the road. He had almost reached Sophia's hiding place when a voice called from the darkness. "That's far enough, Quinn." Fletcher stepped from behind a tree, his revolver trained steadily on Ryder's chest. In the moonlight, his expression was grim but not unsympathetic. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," the deputy continued. "All I want is the girl. You can still walk away from this if you cooperate now." "I can't do that," Ryder replied evenly. "Can't or won't," Fletcher challenged. "Think about what you're throwing away, man. Your land, your reputation, your freedom, all for a woman accused of murder." "A woman falsely accused," Ryder corrected. "We have proof, Fletcher. Documents showing financial crimes that got Thornton killed by someone else, not Sophia. We're taking them to federal authorities in Denver." Fletcher's aim wavered slightly. "What kind of proof?" "Bank records, investment documents. Evidence of embezzlement spanning years," Ryder explained, seeing doubt flicker across the lawman's features. "Sophia didn't kill Thornton. She was framed because she discovered his theft." "Even if that's true," Fletcher said, his resolve visibly weakening, "I have a duty to bring her in. The warrant is legal, issued by a judge in Colorado." "Based on false evidence," Ryder argued. "Give us 3 days to reach Denver. If what we're saying isn't true, you'll have lost nothing but time. If it is true, you'll have prevented an innocent woman from hanging." For a long moment Fletcher remained silent, his internal struggle evident in his expression. Finally, he lowered his weapon slightly. "3 days," he said grudgingly. "Then I come after you both with everything I can muster." Relief washed through Ryder. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Fletcher warned. "My deputies are still searching the north section. You'd best be gone before they return." Ryder nodded, understanding the implicit permission to leave. He led the horses toward Sophia's hiding place, finding her pale but composed, having heard every word of the exchange. "He's letting us go," she whispered incredulously. "For now," Ryder confirmed, helping her mount, "but we need to make the most of this head start." They rode through the night, pushing southeast toward Denver, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. By dawn, they had crossed into Colorado territory, and by midday, they reached a small settlement where Ryder was able to send a telegram to Hollister, informing him of their approach and situation. The response came swiftly. "Continue to Denver stop, will meet you at boundary stop, bring all evidence stop HOLLSDR." "He'll meet us himself," Ryder explained to Sophia as they prepared to continue their journey. "That's good, means he's taking this seriously." Sophia nodded, though exhaustion was evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. The past days had taken their toll, both physically and emotionally. Her ribs, not fully healed from the wagon accident, pained her after long hours in the saddle, and worry had etched fine lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. "We'll rest longer tonight," Ryder decided, noting her discomfort. "Find a proper bed at the next town. We're making good time." "No," Sophia protested. "Every hour counts, I'll manage." Her determination both impressed and concerned Ryder. "You won't be any good to anyone if you collapse," he pointed out gently. "A few hours proper rest won't change the outcome." Eventually she relented, and that night they stopped at a small hotel in a mining town along their route. The anonymity of the bustling settlement provided welcome cover, allowing them to blend in among the constantly shifting population of miners, gamblers, and travelers. In the privacy of their rented room, Sophia finally allowed herself to fully acknowledge the pain and fatigue she'd been suppressing. As Ryder gently helped her remove her boots, she winced at the movement. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his hands gentler still. "Don't be," she replied with a tired smile. "I'd endure far worse to clear my name and build a future with you." The simple statement, spoken without drama or pretense, filled Ryder with a profound sense of certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, facing them together was the only path he wanted. "Marry me," he said suddenly, "for real this time." Sophia's eyes widened, fatigue momentarily forgotten. "What?" "Marry me," Ryder repeated, taking her hands in his. "Not because we need a cover story or because it's convenient, but because I love you and can't imagine my life without you in it." For a moment Sophia simply stared at him, tears gathering in her blue eyes. Then a radiant smile transformed her tired face. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll marry you, though perhaps we should wait until I'm not wanted for murder." Ryder laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. A minor detail, he agreed, pulling her into his arms, but one will resolve soon enough. They reached Denver on the afternoon of the third day, weary but determined. True to his word, Hollister met them at the city limits, accompanied by two deputies who provided escort through the bustling streets to the federal building. Inside his office, Hollister listened intently as Sophia presented her evidence, explaining the connections between documents and the discrepancies she had discovered. His expression grew increasingly grave as the full picture emerged. "This is more extensive than I initially suspected," he said when she had finished. "Not just embezzlement, but a pattern of systematic theft targeting vulnerable beneficiaries." He tapped the portfolio thoughtfully. "And you say Thornton wasn't the only one involved?" "His partners had to know," Sophia confirmed. "The transactions required multiple approvals, and some of the manipulations were too complex for one person to execute alone." "Which gives them motive for murder," Hollister mused. "If Thornton was threatening to expose them or demanding a larger share. Or if he became a liability when I confronted him," Sophia added. "I told him I had evidence." "He might have panicked," approached his partners. Hollister nodded slowly. "The timing aligns with what we've learned about the Boulder case, too. Harold Whitaker killed 2 days before Thornton. Same method, single shot to the chest after banking hours." He rifled through papers on his desk, extracting a document. "And look at this, Whitaker's bank had financial ties to Thornton's. They shared investments in several mining operations." Hope kindled in Sophia's eyes. "You believe me, then?" "That I didn't kill him." "These documents alone cast significant doubt on the case against you," Hollister confirmed. "Combined with the pattern we're seeing and additional information my agents have gathered," he smiled slightly. "Yes, Miss Ellis, I believe you." The relief that washed over Sophia's face made her seem years younger, the weight of months of fear and uncertainty lifting visibly. Ryder, watching from nearby, felt his own tension ease slightly. "What happens now?" he asked, Hollister's expression sobered. "Now comes the complex part. I'll need to coordinate with authorities in Central City, present this evidence through official channels. There will be resistance. Some of the men implicated are powerful figures in Colorado territory." "How long?" Sophia asked anxiously. "To fully clear your name, weeks, possibly months," Hollister admitted. "But I can do something immediately to ensure your safety while the investigation proceeds." He reached for a blank form on his desk. "A federal order of protection, placing you under Justice Department authority pending resolution of the case. It won't dismiss the charges, but it will prevent local authorities from arresting you while we investigate." "And what about Ryder?" Sophia asked. "He's risked everything to help me." Hollister glanced at his friend with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. "I can include language protecting those who have assisted a federal witness," he said. "It won't undo any damage to his reputation back in Wyoming, but it will prevent legal consequences." Relief and gratitude mingled in Sophia's expression. "Thank you for believing me, for helping us." "Thank Quinn," Hollister replied with a slight smile. "His judgment of character has always been excellent, even when his judgment regarding personal risk has been questionable." He shuffled papers on his desk. "Now, I'll need both of you to provide formal statements. And Miss Ellis, we should arrange secure accommodations for you while the investigation proceeds." "She stays with me," Ryder said firmly. Hollister raised an eyebrow. "Quinn, we're getting married," Ryder explained, his tone brooking no argument, "as soon as possible." Hollister's other eyebrow joined the first in surprise before he chuckled softly. "I see." He glanced between them, noting the determined set of Ryder's jaw and the quiet certainty in Sophia's eyes. "Well, that simplifies the accommodation question at least. Though I expect you'll want to resolve this situation before returning to Wyoming." "Yes," Sophia confirmed. "I need to clear my name completely, not just temporarily. I won't build a life on uncertainty or the possibility that these charges might resurface someday." "A wise decision," Hollister agreed. "And while marriage won't prevent you from testifying, it will provide additional protection through Quinn's status as a veteran and landowner." He smiled slightly. "Not to mention making your living arrangements less scandalous while you're in Denver." The administrative process took hours, statements recorded, documents cataloged, the protective order drafted and signed. By the time they emerged from the federal building, night had fallen over Denver, the city lights glittering in the darkness. My men will escort you to a hotel, Hollister said as they stood on the steps. Tomorrow we'll continue with additional statements and begin formal depositions. It's going to be a lengthy process, but you've taken the most important step. Ryder clasped his friend's hand gratefully. We can never repay you for this. You already have, Hollister replied seriously. During the war and after, he glanced at Sophia. Just be happy, Quinn. After everything, you deserve that much. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of legal proceedings, depositions, and increasingly promising developments. Hollister's investigation uncovered additional evidence supporting Sophia's claims, including discrepancies in Thornton's bank records that matched patterns found in the Boulder case. More importantly, they identified a third partner connected to both banks who had disappeared shortly after the murders, taking a substantial sum with him. Vincent Mercer, Hollister explained during a briefing in his office a week after their arrival. Board member at both institutions, with signing authority on the accounts where most of the embezzlement occurred. He was last seen boarding a train to San Francisco the day after Thornton's murder. That's him, Sophia confirmed, excitement coloring her voice. He was at the bank frequently, always hovering when Harrison discussed my father's accounts. He claimed to be helping manage the investments, but he always made me uneasy. We've dispatched agents to California, Hollister continued. If he's still there, we'll find him. His flight alone casts significant doubt on the case against you, Miss Ellis. Progress continued steadily over the following weeks. The district attorney in Central City, initially resistant, became increasingly cooperative as evidence mounted against Mercer and his associates. By the end of the month, Hollister had secured a preliminary agreement to suspend the charges against Sophia pending completion of the federal investigation. Throughout it all, Ryder remained steadfastly by her side, attending every meeting, providing support during difficult depositions when she had to relive the confrontation with Thornton and her desperate flight afterward. Their bond strengthened through the shared ordeal, each day confirming what both already knew, that what had begun as rescue and necessity had transformed into something neither had expected to find on the frontier. A partnership of equals built on respect, admiration, and deepening love. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 weeks after their arrival in Denver, Hollister summoned them to his office with news that would change everything. We found Mercer, he announced without preamble as they entered, in San Francisco, preparing to board a steamer for Australia. Sophia gasped softly, her hand finding Ryder's. Did he confess? Better, Hollister replied, satisfaction evident in his tone. He tried to buy his way out of arrest, offering to implicate his real partners in exchange for leniency. Seems he was merely the instrument, not the mastermind. He slid a document across his desk. This arrived by telegraph this morning. The Central City District Attorney has officially withdrawn all charges against you, Miss Ellis. You are, legally speaking, a free woman. For a moment, Sophia seemed unable to process the words. Then, with a small cry that was half laugh, half sob, she launched herself into Ryder's arms. He caught her, holding her tightly as the full impact of the news washed over them both. It's over, she whispered against his chest. It's really over. Not over, Ryder corrected gently, tipping her face up to his. Just beginning. 3 days later, in a small church on the outskirts of Denver, Sophia Ellis became Sophia Quinn in a simple ceremony attended by James Hollister and a few colleagues who had worked on her case. She wore a new dress of cornflower blue that matched her eyes, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Ryder, in a new suit that still made him slightly uncomfortable, thought she had never looked more beautiful than when she spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice that carried to the rafters. I promise to stand by you through whatever comes, she said, her eyes holding his. To build a home and a life with you, and to never forget that sometimes the worst storm brings the greatest blessing. Ryder, a man never comfortable with flowery speech, found the words he needed when the moment came. I promise to protect you, not because you need protection, but because you deserve to be cherished, he said. To respect your mind as much as I love your heart, and to thank whatever fate or fortune brought you to my door that night in the storm. As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands purchased with money Hollister had helped recover from Sophia's rightful inheritance. Ryder felt the last walls around his heart dissolve completely. The frontier had taught him that attachment was dangerous, that caring meant vulnerability, that isolation was safer than connection. Sophia had proven each lesson wrong, showing him instead that the true courage lay in opening oneself to possibility, even amid uncertainty. With winter approaching, they made the journey back to Wyoming territory, uncertain what awaited them at the lazy Q news of Sophia's exoneration had been telegraphed ahead, but Ryder harbored no illusions about the reception they might receive. The frontier had a long memory for scandal, even when proven false. They arrived on a clear November afternoon, the ranch looking much as they had left it, though with signs of neglect after months of absence. To their surprise, smoke rose from the cabin chimney, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal Martha Reed, beaming with welcome. "About time you two returned," she called, bustling out to greet them. "Daniel and I were starting to worry you'd decided to stay in Denver permanently." Behind her, Daniel emerged with a rare smile. "Place needed some looking after," he explained gruffly. "Figured you'd want it ready when you got back." Overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness, Sophia embraced Martha while Ryder clasped Daniel's hand gratefully. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "Neighbors look out for each other," Daniel replied simply. Besides, Martha was determined to make things right after that business with Fletcher. Inside, they found the cabin not merely maintained but improved. The floor had been scrubbed, the windows washed, and fresh provisions stocked in the pantry. A new quilt adorned the bed, clearly Martha's handiwork, and the stove radiated welcome heat against the autumn chill. "We heard the news 3 weeks ago," Martha explained as they settled around the table with coffee. "When the telegram came confirming the charges were dropped, I made sure everyone in Sweetwater knew the truth. Even Fletcher had to admit he was wrong." "How bad was it?" Ryder asked, needing to know where they stood with the community. Daniel and Martha exchanged glances. "Mixed," Daniel admitted. "Some folks understood once the facts came out, others," he shrugged, "takes time to change minds." "But they will change," Martha said firmly. "Especially now that you're properly married and settling down to ranching like respectable folk." She patted Sophia's hand. "Just give them time, dear, you'll win them over." After the Reeds departed, promising to return soon with more neighbors ready to welcome them home, Ryder and Sophia stood together on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set over the rolling grasslands of the Lazy. "It's beautiful," Sophia said softly, "even more than I remembered." Ryder's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. "It's home," he said simply. "Our home." Sophia turned in his embrace, her blue eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "Yes," she agreed, "our home at last." As dusk settled over the Wyoming frontier, Ryder Quinn held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a stormy night and a desperate rescue to a love that had withstood false accusations, flight, and the very real possibility of losing everything, they had emerged stronger, their bond tempered by adversity into something unbreakable. The frontier was indeed no place for weakness, as Ryder had always believed. But he had been wrong about one crucial truth. Love was not weakness but strength, not vulnerability but armor against the harshness of the world. In Sophia, he had found not just a wife but a partner equal to the challenges of frontier life, her intelligence and courage complementing his own in ways he was still discovering. And as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above the Lazy Q, Ryder Quinn understood with perfect clarity that sometimes a man's greatest fortune could arrive in the most unexpected circumstances, even abandoned in a storm on the Wyoming frontier, waiting to be found.